Story 1.
I, a 24-year-old guy, was in a relationship with my girlfriend Ashley, who's 20. We've been dating for a while, and I loved her a lot. Ashley is an incredibly hardworking person, always focused on school, where she's aiming to get into nursing school soon. She spends most of her time between studying for her classes and doing chores. When she finally had free time, she would indulge in a couple of hours of playing The Sims, which had become her regular routine. But here's the thing: I began to feel frustrated. I couldn't help but notice that while Ashley worked hard for her future, she spent far too much time on a game that seemed so frivolous, given everything else she had going on. I knew she had so much more potential to do adult things, like spending quality time with me or pursuing other hobbies, but instead, she dedicated hours to building digital characters and virtual worlds. It wasn't that I disliked The Sims, but I felt that it was becoming an unhealthy distraction, and our time together was too limited for her to be absorbed in this virtual reality. So, one night, feeling particularly resentful, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I thought, maybe if I delete her save files, it'll make her realize how much time she's wasting. I didn't delete the entire game, just her current saves, the ones she spent hours on. I figured that would force her to reconsider her priorities. I didn't expect it to backfire in the way it did. When Ashley logged into her game the next day, she immediately noticed something was wrong. Her character families, the ones she'd been cultivating for years, were gone. She thought it was a glitch and kept restarting the game, but nothing worked. Finally, I came clean and told her I'd deleted her saves, thinking she would just brush it off. After all, it's just a game, right? Wrong. Ashley flipped out. She told me that she had been playing in that save since 2017 and had invested so much time into it. Years of gameplay gone in an instant. She was devastated. I tried to minimize it, brushing it off by saying she could easily remake her characters if it mattered so much. But I didn't understand the depth of her attachment to the game, nor how much it represented her need to escape into something familiar after long days of stress. Things spiraled quickly from there. She stormed out of my apartment, leaving her laptop behind. I tried calling her, but she wouldn't answer. I now realize how horribly I misjudged the situation, but at the time, all I could think about was how to fix it. Eventually, I found myself questioning my actions. Maybe it wasn't just the game, maybe there was a deeper issue. But by then, she was already too angry to listen to me. I wasn't prepared for the aftermath. A few days later, Ashley responded to my post online. She not only found my post, but she also exposed everything I did. She described how I didn't just delete the saves, I had gone a step further and smashed her backup drive with a hammer in a fit of rage when she started crying and begging me to stop. She revealed that the whole reason I'd been so controlling was due to my jealousy and insecurities, claiming I didn't respect her boundaries or give her space. She was right. Over the years, I had become more controlling, constantly wanting to be by her side, never allowing her to enjoy time alone or with others, and I had even pressured her into things she wasn't comfortable with. As her response unfolded, it became clear that I had caused much more damage than just deleting some game saves. My actions had eroded her sense of self-worth. She spoke about how my family and friends treated her poorly, with constant racist remarks, and how I never stood up for her. I was horrified, yet deep down, I knew she was right. The relationship had become toxic, and I had played a major role in it. I had destroyed her trust in me and, worst of all, I didn't even recognize it until it was too late. Ashley's response was chilling. She said that our relationship had been a constant battle where I tried to control her every move. She described how I'd gone through her phone in the past, and how I'd lied about not knowing the details of her game because we discussed it multiple times before. She clarified that it wasn't about the time spent together. It was about me never allowing her to have any autonomy, as if to rub salt in the wound. She said she couldn't even post about me on her social media because she was always on edge, fearing what I might do if I found out. The more I read, the more ashamed I felt. I knew I had lost her, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't take back what I had done. The final nail in the coffin came when she mentioned looking into a restraining order, and I realized that I had pushed her to the point where she felt she needed to protect herself from me. I had no idea how far I had pushed her until I read her words. In the end, I don't know if I can ever truly make amends. What I did was unforgivable, and I'm left with nothing but regret. Ashley has moved on, and I'm left to reflect on how my jealousy, insecurity, and attempts to control her led to the destruction of everything we had. The lesson is clear. Sometimes, it's not about being right or wrong about a trivial matter, it's about respecting the person you love and never crossing the line of control. And now, it's too late for me to undo the damage.
Story 2.
I always thought relationships were about balance, about give and take. But somewhere along the way, I realized I was the only one giving, and well, she was lost in a world that didn't include me. Let me start from the beginning. I loved Ashley. I really did. She was smart, hardworking, and had this laser focus when it came to her goals. She was juggling school, chores, and what felt like a never-ending list of responsibilities. But there was one thing that consumed her more than anything: The Sims 4. Every spare moment she had, she spent building her perfect little digital world, crafting elaborate lives for her characters, making sure every detail was flawless. And me, I was just a shadow in the background, waiting for whatever time she could spare. At first, I thought, it's just a game. She'd get bored eventually, but months passed, then years, and every night was the same: her hunched over her laptop, totally immersed, while I sat alone. Then I got an idea. If the game was gone, maybe she'd finally see me again. So, one night, while she was sleeping, I did it. I went into her laptop and deleted every single one of her save files. Years of work gone in seconds, but I didn't stop there. I found her backup drive and smashed it with a hammer just to be sure. The next morning, when she booted up the game and saw the blank screen, her face went pale. She kept restarting it, clicking through folders, checking for anything left. Then she turned to me. "Why died? It's gone," she whispered. I shrugged. "Yeah, I deleted it." At first, she thought I was joking. But when she realized I wasn't, her hands started shaking. Her breathing became ragged. Then, she screamed, a scream so raw and painful it made my stomach drop. "You did what?" she shrieked, shoving me back so hard I stumbled. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" I rolled my eyes. "It's just a game, Ashley. Maybe now you can focus on real life instead of..." But I didn't get to finish. She was already grabbing her phone, furiously typing something. And that's when things got so much worse. She found my Reddit post, the one where I bragged about deleting her saves. The one where I mocked her. "Oh my God," she whispered. Then she looked up at me with pure hatred. "Did you really think I wouldn't see this?" Her voice was deathly quiet. And then she let loose. She exposed everything. She told the world about how controlling I was, how I followed her everywhere, how I checked her messages behind her back. She told them about the time I blew up her phone while she was taking care of her sick mother because I needed attention. She revealed that I lied about my job, lied about my life, lied about who I really was. Then came the worst part, the part that made my blood run cold. She posted a video. It was security footage of me, sneaking into her room while she was sleeping, staring at her, holding her phone. I felt my stomach drop. Thousands of people saw it. The comments flooded in. "This is straight up terrifying. This guy is a psychopath. Ashley, get out now." Within hours, I was completely destroyed. Ashley blocked me on everything. She got security cameras installed. She even looked into a restraining order. And me, my reputation was in shambles. My friends turned on me. My own family wouldn't speak to me. I thought deleting her game would bring her closer to me. Instead, I lost her forever. But that wasn't the worst part. A week later, I woke up in the middle of the night to a sound outside my window. Scraping, tapping ... I froze. Slowly, I turned to look, and there, standing outside in the darkness, was Ashley. Her face was completely blank, unmoving, staring. Then she whispered something. So quiet I barely heard it. "You took my world away. Now I'll take yours." And then she was gone.
Story 3.
I always thought my family was normal. My dad worked late, traveled often for business, and sometimes missed important events, but that was just life. Right. I never questioned it. Not even when he'd disappear on weekends with vague excuses, or when he'd get strangely defensive if I asked too many questions. He was my dad. He loved me. He loved my mom. That was all I needed to believe, but looking back, there were cracks in the perfect picture, tiny inconsistencies I had been too blind or too trusting to see. And then, on my 18th birthday, everything unraveled. It started with my mom acting strange. She had been off all day, her smile forced, her eyes avoiding mine. Normally, birthdays were a big deal in our house, presents in the morning, cake at night, my dad making a big speech about how proud he was of me. But this year, something was different. My dad had left early, saying something about a work emergency, and my mom had been distant, distracted. I brushed it off at first. Maybe he was just busy. Maybe she was tired. But when I finally confronted her that evening, she broke down in a way I had never seen before. Tears streamed down her face as she handed me an envelope, her hand shaking like she was handing me a loaded gun. "I need you to see this," she whispered. My stomach twisted as I pulled out the contents. Photos, dozens of them. My dad, laughing with another woman, holding her close, and worst of all, with another daughter, a girl who looked just like me. My heart slammed against my ribs as I flipped through the pictures, each one a punch to the gut. Holidays, birthdays, vacations, moments he had missed with me, but had spent with her. The timeline was impossible to ignore. He wasn't just cheating, he had an entire other family. And I was the secret. I was the other family. My breath came in shallow gasps. I tried to make sense of it. Who was she? Who were they? My mother stood frozen, watching as I connected the dots in real time. "How long?" I choked out. "How long have you known?" She squeezed her eyes shut, fresh tears slipping down her cheeks. "Too long," she whispered. My knees buckled, and I sank onto the couch, the pictures scattered around me like broken glass. This couldn't be real. My dad wasn't this kind of man. He had always been there for me, always. But now, with every memory flashing before me, I started to see the truth. The work trips, the canceled plans, the times he had forgotten my birthday or had to make it up to me later. The way he always seemed just a little too stressed, a little too preoccupied. The lies weren't even subtle, I had just never questioned them. And suddenly, I had to know more. My hands trembled as I grabbed my phone and started searching. It didn't take long. A name, a profile, and then, there she was. Her profile picture was a selfie with him, my dad, his arm wrapped around her like she was his whole world. My vision blurred as I clicked through her photos. Everyone confirming my worst nightmare, but it was her bio that finally shattered me. Daddy's little girl. My stomach twisted so hard I thought I was going to be sick. My fingers felt numb as I scrolled through the comments, seeing birthday wishes, Father's Day posts, years of a life I had never been part of. He hadn't just been hiding her, he had been loving her, taking care of her, being there for her in a way he had never been for me. And the most horrifying realization of all, she had no idea I existed. My throat tightened. This wasn't just betrayal. This was something darker. I had spent my whole life thinking I was part of a whole, that I had a family, that my dad was my protector. But in reality, I was just a half-truth, a hidden chapter in a book he had never wanted to be read. I sat there, frozen, until my phone buzzed in my hand. A new message, from her. "Hey, I think we need to talk." My breath caught in my throat. My mom saw the look on my face, her expression crumbling into something between pity and heartbreak. "She knows," I whispered. The room felt like it was closing in, the walls pressing against me. My entire life was unraveling in real time, slipping through my fingers faster than I could catch it. I barely registered myself typing back. "Who are you?" Her reply came almost instantly. "I think I'm your sister." Sister. The word felt foreign. Wrong. I had always been an only child. My dad had always told me how much he loved me, how I was his world. But that had been a lie, a carefully constructed illusion designed to keep me in the dark. I felt a surge of something ugly and raw bubbling up inside me: rage, grief, confusion. I didn't know what to do with it, so I did the only thing I could. I waited. I didn't sleep that night. My mind kept looping through every interaction I had ever had with my father, analyzing them under this horrifying new lens. Had he ever loved me? Or was I just a mistake he had to keep secret? The next morning, I waited until he came home. I sat in the dark like something out of a horror movie, my hands curled into fists, my heart pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. When he walked in and saw me, he froze. The color drained from his face, and in that moment, I knew. He already knew that I knew. "Dad," I whispered, my voice shaking as I slid the pictures across the table. He stared down at them, his hands trembling as he picked one up. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. My mother stood in the doorway, her expression carved from stone. He looked at me, then at her, and I saw something flicker in his eyes, not guilt, not remorse, fear. Fear because he knew it was over, the lies, the double life, the illusion shattered. "It's not what you think," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. My laugh was bitter, hollow. "Oh, really? Because I think you've been lying to me my entire life. I think you had a real daughter. And I think I was just your side project." His face twisted in pain. But I didn't let him speak. I couldn't. "How long?" I demanded. "How long have you been playing both sides?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The truth was already there, written all over his face. And then, as if the universe wanted to twist the knife deeper, my phone buzzed again. Another message. From her. "Do you want to meet?" I looked up at my father, and for the first time in my life, I saw him for what he really was. A coward, a liar, a man who had built his life on deception and thought he could get away with it. And now he was about to lose everything. Just like he deserved.
Story 4.
I always thought I had the perfect marriage. My husband, Daniel, was charming, hardworking, and successful, always providing for us, always making sure we had the best life possible. When he traveled for work, I miss him terribly, but I understood. He was climbing the corporate ladder, making sacrifices for our future. He would leave for days, sometimes weeks, but he always came back with gifts, stories about tough meetings and long flights, and a reassuring smile that told me everything was okay. I never questioned it. I never doubted him until the night everything changed. It started with a simple accident. Daniel had left his laptop open on the kitchen counter, something he never did. He was meticulous about his devices, always logging out, always clearing his history. But that night, as I walked past, I saw an email pop up on the screen. "I miss you already. Last night was incredible. Can't wait until next time." My breath hitched. My heart slammed against my ribs. I froze in place, staring at those words, willing them to disappear, to mean something else. But deep down, I knew. My hands shook as I moved the cursor, clicking into the email thread, my stomach twisting tighter with each line. There were dozens of messages, some spanning back years, messages full of passion, love, secrets. And the worst part, they weren't from one woman. They were multiple names, different cities, different stories. My husband had an entire second life. No, not just a second. A third, a fourth, maybe even more. The room spun around me. My mind refused to process the words in front of me. This wasn't just an affair. This wasn't just a mistake. Daniel had been living a double life, maybe even multiple lives, right under my nose. My stomach churned as I scrolled further. Photos, hotel confirmations, flight itineraries, business trips that had never been about business, weekend conferences that were really romantic getaways, late-night meetings that were spent in someone else's bed. My entire marriage, my entire life with him a lie. I stumbled back, gripping the edge of the counter, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. How had I been so blind? How had I missed this? The way he was always just a little too eager to leave. How he'd come back refreshed, excited, like being home was the burden, not the job. The way he never let me drop him off at the airport, insisting that an Uber was easier. The way he sometimes came back with gifts that didn't quite match the city he claimed to have been in. My vision blurred with tears. I needed to get out of there. I needed air. I grabbed my phone and bolted to the car, my mind racing. I could barely breathe as I sat in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel, my pulse pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. I needed proof. I needed confirmation. So I did something I never thought I would do. I followed him. He had another trip planned that weekend. San Francisco, he had said. A big client meeting. He had kissed my forehead, told me he loved me, and walked out the door like everything was normal. Like he wasn't about to spend the weekend with God knows who. I waited until he was at the airport, then booked the next flight out to the same city. My hands were clammy as I boarded the plane, my heart slamming against my ribs. What if I was wrong? What if this was all a misunderstanding? But deep down, I knew, and I was about to find out just how deep this betrayal went. When I landed, I took a cab straight to the hotel. He had booked the one he thought I would never see. My hands trembled as I approached the front desk, my voice barely steady. "Hi, I'm looking for Daniel last name. He should have checked in today." The receptionist smiled. "Yes, Mr. Last Name checked in a few hours ago. Would you like me to call the room?" My stomach twisted. "No," I said quickly. "Just, can you tell me if he's alone?" The receptionist hesitated. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I can't, please," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I just need to know." She glanced around, lowering her voice. "He checked in with a guest, a woman." My knees nearly buckled. I forced a smile, nodded, and turned away before she could see the devastation on my face. This was it. This was real. I took the elevator up to his floor, my pulse pounding in my throat. My hands were ice cold, my breath shaky. I had no plan, no idea what I would do. But when I reached his door, I didn't hesitate. I knocked. Silence. Then, soft footsteps. The door creaked open, and there he was, Daniel, shirtless, disheveled, his wedding ring missing. Behind him, a woman in lingerie appeared in the background, her eyes widening in shock as she saw me. That's when the rage hit, white hot, blinding, consuming. "You bastard," I whispered, my voice shaking with fury. Daniel's face drained of color. "Oh my God, what are you?" I shoved past him into the room, my entire body shaking. The woman brunette, younger than me, prettier than me, grabbed a robe, stammering something, but I didn't care. I wasn't here for her, I was here for him. "How long?" I demanded. "How many?" His mouth opened and closed, like a fish gasping for air. He looked so pathetic, so small. "I can explain." "Don't." My voice was eerily calm. I pulled out my phone, my fingers still trembling, because I already know. I know about the others, I know about the emails, the hotels, the trips, I know everything. He stumbled back, running a hand through his hair. You didn't mean to get caught," I spat. My blood was boiling, my vision tunneling. "You lied to me. For years. You made me feel like I was crazy, like I was paranoid. But it was you. It was always you." His lips parted, searching for an excuse, a justification. But there was nothing, and that's when I knew I was done. I turned on my heel, storming out of the room before I could break down in front of him. But as I reached the elevator, I heard him call after me, "Wait, please, wait, please." I spun around, my voice sharp as a knife. "Lose my number, Daniel. Lose my name, lose everything, because you just lost the best thing that ever happened to you." And then, as the elevator doors slid shut, I saw the look in his eyes, not just regret, not just panic, fear, because for the first time, he realized that he had nothing left.
Story 5.
The night before my best friend Emily's wedding should have been a celebration, a night filled with excitement, laughter, and the kind of nervous energy that comes with knowing your entire life about to change. Instead, it turned into a nightmare that none of us could have ever seen coming. It started with a simple, eerie silence. Her fiancé, Mark, was supposed to meet us for the rehearsal dinner at the venue, but he never showed. At first, we all assumed it was a simple miscommunication. Maybe he was stuck in traffic or caught up in last-minute preparations. But as the minutes turned into hours, and calls and texts went unanswered, the unease in the room became unbearable. Emily went from anxious to outright panicked. Her hands shook as she tried calling him over and over, her voice breaking as she left desperate voicemails. "Mark, please call me back. I don't care if you have cold feet. Just tell me you're okay." But there was nothing. No answer, no sign of him. It was like he had vanished into thin air. By midnight, the entire wedding party was involved in the search. His groomsmen drove to his apartment empty. His car was gone, his suit still hanging in the closet, untouched. Calls to his family led nowhere. They hadn't heard from him since the morning. We contacted hospitals, the police, nothing. It was as if Mark had ceased to exist. Emily was inconsolable, curled up on the floor in her wedding dress fitting room, sobbing so hard she could barely breathe. We were all thinking the same thing, but were too afraid to say it out loud. Had something happened to him? Was he hurt? Dead? Had he been taken? But as the hours dragged on and we scoured through every possible explanation, my gut told me something was off. I had known Mark for years. He wasn't the type to just disappear. If he had cold feet, he would have at least told someone. The whole thing felt orchestrated, planned, and that's when I made the biggest mistake of my life. I decided to find out the truth myself. I started retracing his steps, calling his coworkers, checking his usual hangouts. No one had seen him since that morning. Then, in a last-ditch effort, I checked his credit card activity. What I found made my blood run cold. His last transaction was at a small gas station, one located in the complete opposite direction of the wedding venue. Even stranger, it wasn't just one transaction. There were two 20 minutes apart. Why would he stop at the same gas station twice? Unless he was waiting for someone. Heart pounding. I drove to the location myself. It was a dingy, nearly abandoned gas station off a lonely highway, surrounded by nothing but dark, endless fields. It felt wrong just being there, like the place had absorbed something sinister. I went inside and approached the cashier, a tired-looking old man who barely glanced up from his newspaper. "Hey, I'm looking for someone. He came here last night, tall, dark hair, wearing a suit." "You remember seeing him?" The man sighed, rubbing his forehead. "Yeah, I remember." Looked real nervous, kept checking his phone. I swallowed hard. "Did you see where he went?" The cashier hesitated, then leaned in. "Listen, lady, I don't want no trouble. But that guy, he wasn't alone. Some other man got in his car. They were arguing, real intense. Then they drove off." My stomach twisted. "Do you remember what the other guy looked like?" The old man shrugged. "Didn't see his face much, but I remember the car, black SUV. Tinted windows. Looked expensive." My heart stopped. Black SUV. Tinted windows. I had seen that exact car before, parked outside Emily's apartment just 2 nights ago. My hands shook as I stumbled back to my car, my mind racing. What the hell was happening? I knew I had to go to Emily, had to tell her what I found, but deep down, I was terrified, because suddenly, the pieces were falling into place, and I didn't like the picture they were painting. Mark wasn't just missing, he had been taken. But why, and by who? I barely made it back to Emily's house, my thoughts a jumbled mess. When I burst through the door, she was sitting on the couch, her face pale and blank, staring at her phone like she had been waiting for something. "Emily," I gasped. "I think Mark's in trouble. I found something." But before I could finish, she slowly looked up at me, her expression completely unreadable. And then, in the softest, eeriest voice, she whispered, "I know." My breath caught. "What?" Before I could react, she slid her phone across the table. My fingers trembled as I picked it up and looked at the screen. My blood turned to ice. It was a video of Mark bound and gagged, sitting in a dark room, eyes wide with terror. A masked figure loomed behind him, gripping his hair, forcing him to look into the camera. The voice that followed sent a chill so deep into my bones I thought I might shatter. He made his choice. Now, he pays the price. The screen went black. My mouth went dry. I turned to Emily, my entire body shaking. "What the hell is this?" But she just smiled, a slow, eerie, empty smile. "You don't understand," she murmured. "Mark wasn't who you thought he was. He wasn't innocent. He had debts, secrets, things he kept even from me." I stared at her in horror. "Emily, what did you do?" She exhaled softly, tilting her head. "I didn't do anything." "But they did." A shiver ran down my spine. My hands clenched into fists. "We have to call the police." "No." Her voice was sharp, almost panicked. "You don't get it. If we go to the police, they'll come for me too. And for you. And for anyone who asks too many questions." My stomach twisted. "Who are they?" She hesitated for only a moment before whispering a name that made my blood run cold. A name I never thought I'd hear in connection to my best friend. A name tied to organized crime, disappearances, and people who were never found again. My hands trembled as I backed away. "Emily, what the hell did Mark get involved in?" She looked away. Something he couldn't get out of. The air in the room felt suffocating. I had come here looking for answers, Instead, I had stumbled into something so much darker than I ever could have imagined. And worst of all, Mark wasn't coming back. Because in that moment, I realized the truth: the wedding had never been the target. Mark was.
Story 6.
The night started like any other. My husband and I had planned a long overdue date night, and our usual babysitter, Claire, a responsible 17-year-old girl who had been watching our 2-year-old daughter, Lily, for almost a year, arrived right on time. She was usually upbeat and chatty, but that night, something was different. She was quiet, her eyes darting around like she was expecting something. When I asked if everything was okay, she forced a smile and nodded, but her fingers fidgeted with the hem of her sweater, a nervous habit I hadn't seen before. I shook off the unease, assuming it was just teenage drama, and we left for dinner. Less than an hour later, my phone buzzed a single message from Claire: "Come home. Now." My stomach twisted. No explanation. No emojis. Nothing but urgency. My husband and I exchanged worried glances before grabbing our things and racing home, my hands shaking as I tried calling Claire, but she didn't pick up. When we pulled into the driveway, the house was eerily dark. Claire always left the porch light on, yet the house looked abandoned. A deep sense of dread settled in my chest as I unlocked the door and stepped inside. Silence. The TV was on, but playing static, the faint white noise the only sound in the house. "Claire," I called out, flipping on the lights. The living room was empty, her bag still by the door, but Claire was gone. My husband ran upstairs to check on Lily while I searched the downstairs area, my pulse hammering. That's when I noticed a folded piece of paper on the coffee table, my breath catching as I picked it up. I tried to keep her safe, but it knows now. "Don't let Lily sleep in her room tonight, please." My hands shook as I reread the message, my mind racing with 1,000 terrible possibilities. Upstairs, my husband suddenly shouted for me, his voice laced with panic. I bolted up the stairs, finding him in Lily's room, holding her tightly. She was under the crib, he whispered, his face pale. Hiding. I turned to Lily, my heart breaking as she clung to my husband, her little body trembling. "What happened, baby?" I asked gently, brushing her damp curls from her forehead. Her tiny voice was barely audible as she whispered. The man was watching me. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I turned toward the closet. It was slightly open. I swore I had closed it before we left. My breath caught in my throat as I crept closer, every instinct screaming at me to stop, but I had to see. My husband stood behind me, whispering, "Don't." But I gripped the handle and yanked the door open, empty, but the air inside was wrong thick, heavy, carrying an awful rotting smell. Then, I saw them. Muddy footprints. Large, fresh footprints leading from the closet to Lily's bed. My blood ran cold. Someone had been in our house. In our daughter's room, watching, hiding, and Claire had known. My mind reeled, piecing together the horror of it all. Claire had tried to warn us. She had seen something, but where was she now? My hands shook as I grabbed my phone, dialing her number again. Voicemail. My husband pulled me back. "We need to call the police. Now." The authorities arrived within minutes, searching the house from top to bottom. Nothing. No signs of forced entry. No clues as to where Claire had gone. And worst of all, no explanation for the footprints. One officer suggested they were old, maybe from us bringing in dirt, but I knew they weren't. Something had been in that room. Something had been watching Lily. The next morning, Claire's parents called. She had never come home. The police launched an investigation, but weeks passed with no leads. No one had seen her. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. The missing posters faded. The news stopped covering it. But I never stopped searching. A month later, Lily woke up screaming. I ran into her room, finding her standing in her crib, tears streaking her face. "The man," she whispered. "He's back." My heart nearly stopped. "What man?" "Baby." She pointed at the closet. My breath hitched. The door was wide open. I had closed it before she went to sleep. I forced myself to move, every muscle trembling as I grabbed the handle and yanked it open, empty. But the smell, that awful, rotting smell, was stronger than before. And then I saw it, a note, another one. In Claire's handwriting. "It's still here," I screamed. That was 3 years ago. Claire was never found. The police ruled her disappearance a runaway case. No one believed me when I said something took her. Something was in my house, watching, waiting. I know one thing for certain. It's not done with us yet.
Story 7.
It all started with a strange noise, a dull, rhythmic thumping coming from somewhere in the house, faint, but distinct, like someone tapping lightly on wood. At first, I dismissed it as the usual sounds an old house makes, but over the next few weeks, the noises became more frequent. Sometimes in the middle of the night, sometimes while I was home alone, always seeming to come from somewhere just out of sight. My wife, Emily, acted like she didn't hear it, brushing it off whenever I mentioned it. "How's it settle?" she'd say with a small, almost forced smile, but something about the way she avoided my eyes made my skin crawl. Then there were the odd changes in our home furniture, slightly moved when I knew I hadn't touched it. Doors I swore I closed left slightly ajar, the faint scent of dust and something damp lingering in the air. My unease grew, but it wasn't until I found the key that my reality started to unravel. I was cleaning out the basement when I discovered a small wooden box shoved behind an old bookshelf. Inside was a single, ancient-looking key, cold to the touch despite the warm air. It had a strange symbol carved into it, something that looked almost like an eye, and though I had no idea what it unlocked, a deep unease settled in my gut. I showed it to Emily, expecting her to dismiss it, but the second she saw it, her face went pale. "Where did you find that?" she asked sharply, her voice unusually tense. I pointed to the basement, and for the first time since we moved in, she seemed afraid of our own house. That night, I couldn't sleep. The thumping had returned, more insistent, echoing through the walls. It sounded closer. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was inside the house, that something was watching. Emily lay next to me, stiff and silent, pretending to be asleep. I knew then she was hiding something. The next day, when she left for work, I started searching. I examined every inch of the house, running my hands over the walls, listening for anything hollow. Hours passed. Nothing. Then, just as I was about to give up, I noticed something strange in the hallway closet. The back panel looked wrong. It wasn't flush with the rest of the wall. My pulse quickened. I grabbed the old key from my pocket and, with shaking hands, pressed it against the panel. It clicked. The entire section of the wall shifted. My breath caught as I slowly pushed it open, revealing a narrow, pitch-black corridor leading somewhere deep inside the house. My stomach churned. Emily had never mentioned a hidden room. Why? My hands trembled as I stepped inside, the air growing colder with each hesitant step. The corridor smelled damp and stale, like something rotting. The deeper I went, the more my gut screamed at me to turn back. Then, I reached the door. It was old, made of heavy wood, and covered in deep scratches like something had clawed at it. My heart pounded as I reached for the handle. The moment I touched it, a sound came from the other side, a shuffle, a low, rasping breath. Someone was in there. My entire body froze. I felt a presence, something dark and heavy pressing against the door, like whatever was inside knew I was there. And then, before I could move, the door swung open. I stumbled back, choking on fear as the light from the hallway revealed what was inside. A room, a small, windowless room, and inside it, a bed, a chair, a pile of old, rotting blankets, shackles attached to the wall. My mind refused to understand what I was looking at. This wasn't just a hidden room, it was a cell. A place meant to keep someone here. My breath came in shallow gasps as I stepped inside, the overwhelming scent of decay clawing at my lungs. I turned to the desk in the corner, my fingers shaking as I reached for the only object resting on it, a small, dusty journal. The pages were yellowed, filled with frantic, uneven handwriting. My blood ran cold as I read the first few lines. "He keeps whispering. I can hear him through the walls. He says he remembers me. He says he remembers us. He says he's still here." My heart nearly stopped. My wife's handwriting. I flipped through the pages, the words growing more unhinged, more desperate. "I locked him away, but he still watches. He still waits. I hear him breathing in the dark." My hands trembled violently. I turned to leave, but then I saw it, the handprint. On the wall, smeared in something dark and dried. A single bloody handprint. Fresh. My breath hitched. And then, from the darkness beyond the room, I heard it. A whisper, a voice I did not recognize. "You found me." The door slammed shut, and the light went out.
Story 8.
I never thought much about my roommate's cat, Luna. She was a sleek black creature with piercing yellow eyes, always watching, always lurking in the shadows like she knew something I didn't. I wasn't a cat person, but my roommate, Claire, adored her. She'd always joke that Luna was special, that she had a way of sensing things before they happened. I brushed it off as typical cat owner weirdness until things in our apartment started to feel off. At first, it was little things. Luna never liked Claire. That struck me as odd. Pets love their owners, right, but not Luna. She'd hiss when Claire got too close, scratch at her if she tried to pet her. It wasn't like normal cat behavior. She actively avoided Claire, slinking away, her tail puffed up like she was sensing something I couldn't. But when Claire was gone, Luna was affectionate, curling up beside me, rubbing against my legs, purring like crazy. Then the dreams started. They weren't normal nightmares. In these dreams, I was drowning, my lungs filling with something thick and heavy, my body paralyzed as shadowy hands wrapped around my throat. Every single time, I'd wake up gasping for air, drenched in sweat, my head pounding. And every time, Luna was there, sitting on my chest, staring at me with those golden, unblinking eyes. Things only got worse. I started feeling sick, really sick. My hair was thinning. My skin had turned pale and almost gray. I was constantly exhausted. No matter how much I slept, my hands shook so badly that I could barely hold a coffee cup. I blamed stress. Work had been brutal, and Claire was acting weird. She watched me too closely, always hovering, always asking if I was okay. There was something about the way she said it's something that made my stomach twist. But the weirdest part, she started making my tea every night. At first, it seemed like a sweet gesture. She'd insist it would help me relax, but every time I drank it, I felt off, like my limbs were heavier, my head fuzzier. Luna hated it. She'd sit on the table, tail twitching, staring at the cup with such intensity that it almost unnerved me. Then, one night, as I was sipping the tea, Luna knocked the cup out of my hands. The tea spilled everywhere, seeping into the carpet, but before I could react, Luna let out the most inhuman sound I'd ever heard. It wasn't a growl, it was deeper, darker, almost like a person screaming in agony. Claire and I both froze. She stared at the spilled tea, her face going completely white. And then, in the coldest, quietest voice, she whispered, "You shouldn't have done that." I felt my blood turn to ice. The way she said it, calm, almost regretful, sent every instinct in my body screaming. Something was wrong. I didn't know what, but I knew I was in danger. That night, Luna wouldn't leave my side. She sat at the edge of my bed, unblinking, tail flicking, staring at the door. I barely slept. And then, at exactly 3:07 a.m., I woke up to the sound of my door unlocking. It was slow, deliberate. The handle turned with agonizing slowness, the door creaking open inch by inch. My breath hitched as I turned my head, my body feeling unnaturally heavy, sluggish. And in the dim light, I saw Claire standing in the doorway, holding a syringe. I tried to move, but my limbs wouldn't cooperate. My muscles felt like lead, my vision swimming. I tried to speak, to scream, but my throat was dry and useless. Claire stepped forward, her face eerily calm, her eyes empty. "It's okay," she whispered. "You won't feel a thing." And that's when Luna attacked. She launched herself at Claire's face with a blood-curdling screech, claws raking across her skin. Claire screamed a high, panicked sound as Luna tore at her, her sharp teeth sinking into flesh. Claire stumbled back, slamming into the wall, trying desperately to pry Luna off. In that moment, the fog in my head lifted just enough for me to run. I didn't think I just moved. My legs barely worked, but I forced myself forward, crashing into the hallway, my vision blurring. Behind me, Claire was still screaming, trying to shake off Luna, but the cat was relentless. I don't remember getting to my neighbor's door. I don't remember pounding on it with all the strength I had left, my breath coming in ragged gasps. But I do remember the way my neighbor's face twisted in horror when they opened the door and saw me. I woke up in the hospital. I had been poisoned. The doctors said it had been happening for months, slow doses, just enough to make me sick, just enough to keep me weak and compliant. I was days away from organ failure, and Claire, she was gone. By the time the police got to our apartment, she had vanished. No signs of forced entry, No fingerprints on the syringe they found in my room. Just one thing left behind: Luna. She was sitting on my bed, staring at the door, waiting for me to come back. Claire had been poisoning me all along. The tea, the food, maybe even my water. The nightmares, the exhaustion, it was all her. And Luna knew. She had been trying to warn me, trying to protect me. I moved out the second I was discharged, taking Luna with me. But sometimes, late at night, I wake up to find her sitting at the foot of my bed, staring at the door, ears twitching, tail flicking, like she's waiting for Claire to come back.
Story 9.
I had been taking care of Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore, a reclusive, incredibly wealthy old woman, for nearly 3 years when she passed away. She was in her late 80s, fragile but sharp, her piercing blue eyes always studying me, measuring my words, as if she could see straight into my soul. She had no children, no husband, just a vulture's nest of distant relatives who only visited to remind her of their existence, hoping to secure a piece of her enormous fortune. They never stayed long, never cared for her, they only came to take. And yet, when she died, the biggest shock wasn't that her blood relatives barely shed a tear, it was that she left everything to me. The mansion, the money, the businesses, everything. The lawyer's voice trembled as he read the will. The Whitmore family turned their heads toward me in silent, seething fury. I saw the hatred burning in their eyes, the disbelief warping their smug, entitled faces. And that's when my life became a waking nightmare. The first sign that something was wrong came the night after the will was read. I had moved into her grand estate, a vast, sprawling Gothic mansion filled with priceless antiques, towering bookshelves, and endless halls that whispered with history. That first night, I was jolted awake by the sound of glass shattering downstairs. My heart pounded as I grabbed the nearest heavy object, a brass candlestick, and crept toward the noise. The massive dining room window had been smashed in. The cold night air flooded in, but whoever had done it was already gone. No footprints, no evidence. Just a single red rose lying on the floor beneath the broken glass, its petals dark as blood. A warning. I should have left then. I should have packed my things and walked away from whatever I had stepped into. But I didn't, and that was my mistake. Over the next week, strange things kept happening. Whispers echoed through the halls at night, but when I searched, no one was there. My bedroom door, which I locked every night, would be wide open by morning. I began to feel like I was being watched, a prickling sensation on the back of my neck whenever I stood alone in the mansion. Then, on the fourth night, I woke up to find a shadowy figure standing at the foot of my bed. My scream tore through the silent house, but before I could move, the figure melted into the darkness. The next morning, I found something even worse, a handprint, smeared in something dark and sticky, pressed against my mirror. I called the police, but they found no signs of forced entry. No signs of anyone inside the house but me. Then the accident started. A heavy chandelier crashed down from the ceiling, missing me by inches as I walked through the grand foyer. My car's brake lines were cut, nearly sending me into oncoming traffic. A bottle of poison wine arrived in a package with no return address. The police dismissed it as a prank, but I knew better. The Whitmore family wanted me dead. I was sure of it, but proving it, that was something else entirely. So I did something desperate. I dug into Eleanor's past, searching through the mansion's forbidden rooms, the ones she always told me to never enter. What I found changed everything. In the attic, locked away in an ancient wooden chest, I discovered a collection of letters, their pages yellowed with age. They were written by Eleanor, addressed to a man named Vincent Whitmore, her brother. A brother the family had erased from history. Vincent had been murdered decades ago, his body never found. The letters told a horrific story, how Eleanor had discovered that her own family had killed him to secure their inheritance, how she had lived in fear for years, waiting for them to turn on her next. The final letter was the most chilling. If you are reading this, then it means the Whitmore family has failed to get to me before I could make things right. They are murderers, every last one of them. They will never stop. They killed my brother, and they will kill you too, just as they always intended to kill me. But I have beaten them. My fortune is yours now, and with it, my curse. Be careful, you will never be safe. The moment I read those words, I heard footsteps outside the attic door. Slow, deliberate, coming closer. My breath caught in my throat as I turned off my flashlight and pressed myself into the shadows. The door creaked open, and I saw a figure standing in the dim light. It was Eleanor's nephew, Richard Whitmore, the one who had looked at me with the most hatred during the will reading. But he wasn't alone. Behind him stood the other members of the family, their eyes gleaming with something dark and murderous. "I knew you'd come up here," Richard said, his voice almost amused. "You're just like Eleanor, too curious for your own good." I realized, with a sinking feeling, that I had walked right into their trap. The attic was far from the main house, the walls thick, the door heavy. If they killed me here, no one would hear. No one would ever find me. I ran before they could grab me, sprinting down the attic stairs, my heart hammering in my chest. Behind me, I could hear them chasing, their footsteps thundering like war drums. I reached the grand staircase, but as I turned the corner, I slipped, my foot catching on the edge of the carpet. I fell, tumbling hard, pain exploding through my ribs as I hit the marble floor below. The last thing I saw before blacking out was Richard, standing at the top of the stairs, smiling. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed, my head bandaged, my body sore. A police officer sat beside me. "You're lucky to be alive," he said. "Your security cameras caught everything." That's when I found out the truth. The staff had found me in a pool of my own blood and called the cops just in time. Richard and his accomplices had been caught trying to stage my accidental death. The footage showed them dragging my unconscious body back up the stairs, intending to throw me off again. They were arrested, charged with attempted murder, and as the trial progressed, more of their dark family secrets unraveled. The Whitmore name, once powerful, crumbled under the weight of its crimes. But even after they were gone, even after I was declared the rightful heir, I never felt truly safe. At night, in the depths of the mansion, I sometimes still hear footsteps in the attic, slow and deliberate. I see flickers of movement in the shadows, a whisper of breath against my ear when I'm alone. Eleanor had been right. I had inherited everything: her fortune, her house, her curse. And I don't think I'll ever escape it.
Story 10.
I never thought I would find her diary. It had been 2 years since Emily's death, and I was still drowning in the weight of my grief. We had been together for 10 years, married for 6, and I thought I knew everything about her. But grief plays tricks on you. It makes you think you hear their voice in the next room, makes you see their shadow in the hallway, makes you believe they aren't really gone. I hadn't touched her things since the funeral. I couldn't. Her clothes still hung in the closet. Her perfume still sat on the dresser. The book she had been reading was still open on her knit stand, her place in it forever bookmarked by time itself. But that night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, something strange happened. A soft thud from the closet, like something had fallen. My heart pounded as I got up, opened the door, and looked inside. There, on the floor, was a small, leather-bound journal, one I had never seen before. I don't know what compelled me to pick it up, but the moment I did, a chill crawled down my spine. I opened the first page, and in Emily's familiar handwriting were words that sent a shiver straight to my bones. "If you're reading this, then I'm already dead. And if you love me, please stop now. Don't read any further. Some truths should stay buried." My hands trembled as I turned the page. How could I not read it? I had spent 2 years aching for any last words from her, and now here they were, right in front of me. But the deeper I read, the more I wished I had listened to that warning. Emily wrote about our life together, but not the way I remembered it. She wrote about how she had been keeping secrets from me, terrible secrets. She wrote about how, in the months before her death, she felt like she was being watched. How she would wake up in the middle of the night and feel someone standing at the foot of our bed, only to turn on the light and see nothing. At first, I thought it was paranoia, just the lingering effects of a bad dream. But as I turned more pages, the diary became more unhinged. She talked about him. She never wrote his name, never described his face, just called him the man in the dark. She claimed he followed her everywhere, to work, to the store, even inside our home. She wrote about seeing glimpses of him in the mirror when she brushed her teeth, catching a shadow moving behind her reflection. She said he whispered to her at night, but I never heard a thing. She said he would stand in the doorway, staring at her, but every time she screamed, I would wake up to find the door shut, the room empty, nothing but the sound of her ragged breathing in the dark. She wrote that he told her something so awful, so horrifying, that she refused to write it down. The last few entries were frantic, scrawled in uneven, jagged handwriting, as if her hands were shaking too much to hold the pen steady. She wrote, "He knows that I know. He won't let me leave. He says it's almost time." Then, the final entry, the one that made my blood turn to ice. "He told me the truth tonight. About what you did. About who you really are." I didn't want to believe it. "I loved you, but now I know. I know everything. And I know that if I don't stop him first, he'll make sure I never wake up again." That was the last thing she ever wrote. 2 days later, she was dead. A tragic accident, they had said. She had gone out for a late-night drive and lost control of her car. It had gone off the road, straight into a lake. They found her seatbelt unbuckled, her car window shattered, her body floating in the freezing water. But now, after reading this, it wasn't an accident. It couldn't have been. The room suddenly felt smaller, like the walls were closing in on me. I couldn't breathe. I dropped the diary and stumbled back, my pulse hammering in my ears. Had Emily really been losing her mind? Or had she been telling the truth? And if she was telling the truth, then who the hell was the man in the dark? I barely had time to process it when I heard a sound, a whisper. A voice so low, so cold, that it froze the blood in my veins. "You should have listened to her." My head snapped up. The closet door was still open, but now, in the dark reflection of the mirror on the back of the door, I saw something moving. A shadow, tall, watching. It wasn't mine. I spun around, but there was nothing there. The room was empty. But when I looked back at the mirror, the shadow was closer, and this time, I saw its eyes. Deep, hollow, staring straight into me. The light flickered, the air turned icy, and then, in a breath of cold air against my ear, I heard it say one last thing. She was right. Then, the light went out.
Story 11.
I never thought my life would change because of a game show. It started as a joke. My friends dared me to audition for a popular DNA reveal reality show, the kind where long-lost relatives reunite and shocking paternity secrets are exposed. I laughed it off, but deep down, I had always felt like something was off about my family. My mom raised me alone, always telling me my dad was some deadbeat who abandoned us before I was born. I never questioned it. Why would I? She was a great mom, worked 2 jobs to support me, and always did her best to give me a normal life. But there were little things, the way she tensed up when I asked about him, the way she shut down every conversation about my ancestry, the way family members avoided my questions altogether. Something inside me told me I needed to know the truth. So, on a whim, I sent in an application to the show, half expecting nothing to come of it. But they called me back. They loved my story, the kid who never knew his dad, searching for answers on live television. I told my mom, expecting her to roll her eyes or tell me it was a waste of time, but instead, she went pale, like I had just announced her worst nightmare. She begged me not to do it, said it was all in the past and I should leave it alone, but that only made me more determined. What was she hiding? Who was he? Fast forward to the taping of the show. I sat on stage, heart pounding, as the host read the results. The audience was buzzing with excitement, but I felt like I was about to throw up. And then, the moment of truth, the host smiled, turned to me, and said, "Your father is someone very well known. In fact, he's been in the public eye for decades." I blinked. What? That wasn't what I expected. I thought they were going to tell me he was some random guy from another state, not someone famous. The screen behind me lit up with a picture, and suddenly the air was sucked out of the room. I heard gasps, whispers, and then dead silence. I turned around to see the face of a powerful, well-respected politician, a man who had built his career on family values, morality, and honesty, a man who was married with kids of his own, a man who had been on TV my whole life, making speeches, shaking hands, passing laws. My father. The room started spinning. I couldn't process it. But then, the real bombshell dropped. The host looked at me with a strange expression and said, "There's something else you need to see." The screen changed again. This time, it was a grainy black and white surveillance video. My mom, much younger, sitting at a table in what looked like a hotel bar, and across from her, him, my so-called father, leaning in close, whispering something in her ear. The timestamp was from about 9 months before I was born. But what really made my stomach drop was the second video. This one was from years later. My mother again, but this time, she was crying, arguing with him, begging him, and then, something that made my blood run ice cold: money. He was paying her, a lot of money, and it hit me all at once. Hush money. My father knew about me, the whole time, and instead of doing the right thing, he paid my mother to keep me a secret, to pretend I didn't exist, to erase me from his perfect, clean, public image. I felt sick, betrayed. The audience was in shock. People were whispering, gasping, some even covering their mouths. The host looked stunned, like even she hadn't expected the reveal to be this explosive. My hands were shaking, and then my phone buzzed. A text from my mom. "Get off that stage, now." Before I could even react, the producers were telling me we had to go to commercial. The cameras cut, the lights dimmed, and suddenly I was being ushered backstage. Security guards were moving quickly, whispering into their earpieces, and I realized something was wrong. Someone didn't want this story getting out. Someone was trying to stop me. One of the producers grabbed my arm and whispered, "We need to get you out of here. There's a car waiting for you in the back. Don't go through the front." I was confused, scared, completely overwhelmed. But as I was being rushed down the hallway, I glanced at a monitor playing the show's live feed. My father was on the phone. He looked furious. His face was red, veins bulging in his neck, his hand gripping the receiver so tightly I thought it would snap. And then, I saw it, a group of men in suits pushing their way backstage. They looked like government agents, and they were looking for me. My heart stopped. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just a family scandal. This was something bigger. This was a cover-up that had lasted over 2 decades. And now that the truth was out, there were people who would do anything to make sure I never talked about it again.